if you are, especially if you've already proven that you can't do something on your own, you've been trying and trying and it's not working. Um, I would argue that it's because you're not meant to do it on your own.
Hello and welcome to the Empty Your Bucket Nutrition Plan channel. My name is JT and today we have a special host in the house, Tia. And Tia is a former EYB plan member. She came through the program a couple months ago. So thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And Tia, so that people watching can know a little bit of the context, are you cool with us sharing where you started in this journey?
Yeah, I struggled with weight for a while and had always been okay with getting 5-10 pounds off, and they never stayed off. And I think up until the point that I came to the program, I sort of felt like it was a vanity issue. It was, I would like to look better. But actually, I got to a point where it became very clear to me that it was actually a spiritual issue. And by that, I mean, I realized that I was not exhibiting the self-control that I should have as a believer. And that it wasn't a matter of what I wanted. It was recognizing that the way I was eating and the way I was treating my body was actually sinful, and therefore I could not continue to do it. And so, what I shared with you at that time, and I share sometimes when I tell my story to people, is that, as a believer, when you come into sin, right, you don't think I'm going to stop my adultery after the holidays or I'll cut back on it. Like you deal with. And so the overeating was something I needed to deal with as a sin issue. So I found you eventually. Yeah.
That's awesome. So you came onto the program. Do you remember what you were weighing at the time?
205.
And you're right around 5'3", 5'4"?
I think I'm closer to 5'5".
5'5". Okay, we'll give you the 5'5". 205, but about 5'5". You came onto the program. We set up a goal of 180 pounds in 90 days, right? Where for most people, that would seem as a pretty aggressive goal, 25, 30 pounds in 90 days. We told you that that's very conservative inside of what we do. You lost a total of 27.7 pounds, pretty much 30 pounds. So we hit that goal that we had stipulated in 90 days, which was awesome. I remember you came on to our internal webinar. In that webinar, you said, I came onto the program and I made up my mind that I was going to do whatever the coach asked me to do. Sometimes people have resistance or they resist the coaching, but you were just sold on the idea and you said, I'm going to do whatever this coach tells me to do. You did it and you were successful. Can you give me a little bit of kind of your thinking behind that, the syntax behind, I'm just going to listen to whatever he says? Where did that come from? Is that normal in you, or is that how basically you respond to coaching?
I think, again, all of my experience really can't be separated from, my faith as a believer and what I believe we are commanded to do. And so when I saw your program as sort of the answer to how this is going to change in my life, you became an authority figure, and, we're commanded to obey and submit to those that God puts above us as an authority figure. So it really wasn't, not optional. Once I realized that this was a sin issue that I was struggling with, and once I realized that this program was God's way of helping me deal with that, these became sort of worshipful obedience things as opposed to things that I could choose or choose not to do.
That's awesome. We often say in our program that if you're coachable and you're ready in your heart of hearts, which really speaks about submission, like ready to submit to the coaching, you're going to do well. And I think that that's true for any program, anything that you go into. Obviously, if you pay a coach, you want to make sure that you're following through with the directions. And you did that incredibly well. You lost 29.7 pounds, pretty much 30 pounds in 90 days. So you ended the program in July. We started in April, right? So April, May, June, July. So September, October, November. It's been about 3 months since you graduated the program. Tell me a little bit more about what's happened between graduation and where are we today?
So today I have regained about 10 pounds. I would say that that's been I actually stayed steady for a couple months. July, August was just kind of maintaining and was fine. And then it started creeping back up. So I am today 10 pounds over where I left the program.
Tell me what happened, because I know you started to use sort of the wrong compass, right? Like you were Talk to me a little bit about that.
So yeah, I was watching the scale like a hawk, and I got around one. I stayed around 175 for a long time actually, and up or down. I was like, it's no big deal. I'll deal with this, but I'm busy with these other things. Like I'll get to this. And then when I got to 180, I was like, wait a second. I told myself that I was not going to go over 5 pounds. I really need to do this now. And somehow, even looking at the scale, it got to 185. And I was thinking very recently about what was that? And I actually realized that the scale was not where I should have been looking. I'm always wanting to know what's going on and why things are happening. And so I thought, how has this mapped onto my prayer life and my prayer journal? Now, I pray with my family all the time and I'm in church all the time. But in addition to that, I had like a devotional that I was doing. And I looked, and that weight gain, when it was sort of middling, not really doing anything, I was kind of so. When it got to the 185 or 180, it was, maybe just a couple times a week. And in the last 30 days, when I've actually gained the most weight, I wasn't really in my journal. I wasn't doing those daily habits anymore. And that was kind of a shocking realization to me that was not, the scale was not the place to look for this.
That's, by the way, guys, that's the message, the audio that Tia sent me. That,
Yes.
and it's funny because this is how this is how she positioned it. She said, I don't know if you want me to come on your interview. I've gained 10 pounds since I left the program, and I'm like, good. I'm like, okay. Everyone on this journey should know that there is a possibility. And actually, I encourage people to relapse. And I know that sounds a little morbid. Like, what do you mean you want people to relapse? The reason I say that is because of exactly what you just said. You're able to make very powerful distinctions. When we turn this around, because you have the tools to do so, you'll be able to maintain it, and it'll become more of a lifestyle, because it's not just based on a metric. It's not just based on weight, but it's actually based on a spiritual conviction, which is a lot more powerful than any aesthetic destination that we can ever seek. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I do.
When I think about what you just said, here's what I interpret, right? And please correct me if I'm wrong. So what I hear you saying is that when you are tied to your devotional time, when you're actually in prayer, when you're actually being empowered by the Spirit of God that lives in you, you can more congruently adhere to principles. You can tap into self-control. You can basically you feel like you are more connected. Is that correct? Is that right?
It shouldn't be a surprise that the closer I am to God and to focusing first on Him, the better able I am to do all of these other things. The self-control is a fruit of the Spirit, right? So I should not have been surprised to that the further away from those spiritual disciplines I was, the less self-control I had. And the scale, it's like looking at a symptom to control a disease. The scale is just a symptom of how much self-control I had. And looking there and trying to fix it with all of my might wasn't going to work. And that's not what worked the first time either. It was yielding myself to obedience to God that got me to the place of realizing I need to put those things away. And that was a great realization that I had never had before. But I think this time around, I'm realizing that that's a process and not a one-time event, and that it's something that I have to keep emptying the bucket, as you say, because the nature of buckets is that they fill themselves back up. And I was really shocked at how quickly that could happen and how it will happen on its own. Like it's not a matter, like that's the nature of buckets. It's what they do. They're going to be full if you're not actively taking care of it. And so, the scripture says to seek first the kingdom of God and all these things will be added unto you. So for me, this is like, God gave me the desire to eat. I need to submit that desire to Him. How do I please you with what I'm eating? And it sounds crazy to be like, it's just food. But it really is like a sanctification process. I don't have any stronger desire. I don't have any desire that's going to be repeated multiple times. So what better way to practice sanctification and dying to yourself than to literally have to pray about what you're going to eat and ask God to take my desires and make them His at every meal. Like, and so I'm kind of excited to see what he's going to do in my life, not just with food, but just in general, for me to have to be returning daily, repeatedly, to seek him for his will instead of mine. And I think that's what it is, whether it's food, whether it's some other thing you might be dealing with. It's dying to yourself, seeking him, trusting him that he will do what he says. If you seek him first, he'll give you the things you need. Look to him, and the rest works itself out. And I've experienced it before, and I just have to realize that it's like a daily, ongoing, always thing.
That's super powerful. I mean, you said a bunch of different things that are very powerful, but the one thing that stayed with me big time, and the one thing that this is why I like to use the analogy of the bucket, because if your bucket is empty, it's going to be filled by something. So you have to proactively fill it with the right things. Otherwise, right, the wrong things go in there, and that gets us in trouble. I also, love how you said, in this process, anytime the believer can practice denying self, it's a good day, right? It's a good practice because I always tell my daughters, no will get you in less trouble than the answer yes, right? And so practicing how to say no to those things that are so desirable to the flesh are a way that God can really use to strengthen you in other areas. Hence the reason I think that there's so many parallels between, taming your hunger and being physically active and putting yourself through proactive pain, which is working out, is a way to die to self, right? I've been working out forever, and yet every single time I go out there, I have to convince myself to go out there, right? It's never comfortable, but it's a way to die to self, and I think it alongside prayer, alongside your devotional time, alongside that intimacy with God, it is a very, very powerful way to practice submission to Him. So this is really cool, and this is the reason why I wanted to have this conversation with you, because oftentimes when I talk to Christians about this area, they look at me like I have four heads, or maybe they've never heard how their spirituality, how their convictions actually parallel with things that are on this side of eternity, like stewarding our bodies, right? And you said it. I mean, you hit it right on the head. You said exactly that. You said it's the practice of dying to self. So when I hear you saying, I stopped my devotional time as soon as, or I wasn't connecting as much to God in prayer and in my devotional times, I started to get away from those other principles. In practical terms, what does that look like? So you go into prayer, you go into your reading time, into your studying time, you walk out of there edified. What does that look like in practical terms? Because I think even for a lot of Christians that there's a big disconnect. It's like, well, I pray, I read, I study, but I still lack that self-control. How would you explain that in practical terms?
I think it's what you're praying about. I mean, I literally ask for self-control. I mean, I'm encouraged by the fact that the Bible tells us that if we hear that, that if he hears our prayer and we're asking according to his will, he will say yes. I mean, he's promised that. The Bible also tells us that self-control is the fruit of the Spirit, right? So he has to say yes to this prayer. He's already promised that he will answer prayers according to his will, and he's already shown that my self-control is his will. So if I ask for it, it's going to happen. And it's a matter of, sometimes I have to ask to want it. Sometimes I don't want it. Like, I really don't want to be disciplined. But sometimes really my prayer in the morning is, can you give me the desire to want this? Because I really don't even want to try, but can you at least help me want to try? Because, it's just being honest with where you are, recognizing that he will give good gifts. He has obligated himself to do so through his word, that he will grant his will for you, and he's made his will clear. So if you ask, I don't think you cannot get it. Like, you might have to wait a while, but I mean, it's going to happen. I think it's clear that he wants this for us.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I also think that when you pray for patience, you go through difficult times that actually teach you how to be patient. When you pray for self-control, you actually gain 10 pounds back so that you can learn self-control. And it's just like, it's one of these things where if you don't experience it, then you can't earn it, right? It doesn't just get downloaded to you automatically for being a son or a daughter. It's like you got to go through the adversity. You got to go through the difficult times. I love in the beginning there of the book of James where it says, "Consider it all joy, brothers and sisters, when you experience different trials and tribulations, knowing that you're growing in steadfastness, which is in maturity," right? And it's almost like James, the half brother of Jesus, almost in a very morbid way, being like, "Good, you're suffering. Good, it's going to bring growth," right? And none of us want that kind of pain, but it's needed to grow. And so, this is why I when you sent me that audio, I was like, absolutely, this is a great conversation because this is not a conversation about failure. This is a conversation about reality. And so, how do we snap back to where we were? Because we want to get back there. We want to get back to the 175, and maybe, who knows, maybe even lower, maybe 170. It's really not about the metric at this point. It's really about having the concepts, having the self-control to move forward, and you have those things. Really interesting. So I recently got to speak to the leadership at my church, and I shared something that was super powerful for me. It happened in my devotional time, and it's right up, your alley, what you're talking about here in regards to the fruits of the Spirit. And I was in prayer, and I was just asking God, like, how do I progress? Like, how can I become stronger in this area of progressive sanctification? And so, I went to Galatians chapter 5, verse 22 through 23, which is the fruits of the Spirit. And, as you said, when you pray for his will, if it's in his will, he'll give it to you. So what I was asking is, like, how do I become more obedient to you? How do I become more fruitful to you? And I went to the scripture, and in the scripture it says, "But the fruit of the joy of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, lastly, self-control." So then I went back and I said, "Okay, God, I get that. I've seen that. But how does that actually work? Like, what happens first?" And then he took me through the sequence of the actual words in Galatians 5:22. And it starts off with, says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love." So when you have love, you can have joy. When you have joy, you can have peace. When you have peace, you can have patience. When you have patience, you can have kindness. When you have goodness, you can have faithfulness. When you have gentleness, you can have self-control. So it's like every single one of those piggybacks off of each other, but it all stems from love. And so then you think, like, well, love to who? Right? Definitely not love to self. It takes us back to that scripture where it says, you're to love God with all your mind, all your heart, all your strength, all your spirit, right? And then you love your neighbor. So it goes back to the intimacy. It goes back to the devotional time, because that's where we are strengthened as the branches. He is the vine, we are the branches. So we get strong in that intimacy, which is exactly what you're saying, right? This is what you stopped doing and how you got weak, right? But the opposite of that is, in that intimacy, in that time, you grow in that love, and then all of those other fruits start to fall into place. And lastly, you get self-control. So the two gifts of the Spirit that hug those other gifts are love and self-control, which is really, really, really cool. That was very revealing to me, because I'm a sequence guy, and I'm like, okay, show me what I have to do and I'll do it. And it's just a reminder to go back to that first love, to always be there. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me, you will bear much fruit. Outside of me, you can do nothing, right? And so this is what we're talking about here. And so this is a really interesting subject that usually you don't hear many people talking about weight loss and spirituality and how these things actually come together. But I think they actually really complement each other in a great way. Tia, so what's the plan? You have the mechanics. One of the things that we talk about inside of the Empty Your Bucket Nutrition Plan is that, once you work with me, you'll never need me again. I don't know if you remember when I said that to you. If you work with me once, you'll never need me again. It's a horrible business plan for me, because I'll give you the tools. Do you feel like you have those tools?
Yeah, absolutely. I have the tools. I've experienced it, which I think actually helped to highlight what was wrong, because it's not something mechanical. there has to be something else going on. And, I'm always trying to try to figure out, well, what's wrong and what happened. And it was realizing that made me look in the right place instead of looking at my scale, like we said. But I think one of the things that you talked about before that we didn't really touch on yet, though, was food as an idol. When you were talking about love, it made me think about, as Christians, as putting our love in the right places, because it's really easy to reward yourself with food or to comfort yourself with food. And, that should be praises to God for something that went well, or that should be seeking God for his comfort or wisdom when something went wrong. And not that food is bad, but, we have to put it in its right place. And so I think that the love that you're talking about is right love of the right things and in the right amounts. Like, because, our desires are good, but our flesh warps them into something that they were not meant to be. So we have to be careful not to be led by them, because we know, they're fallen, they get twisted. And so it's really just putting those desires back to God and giving them and saying, this came from you. Don't let me twist it. Let me have it the way you want me to have it. Use it the way you want me to have it. And, stop patting myself on the back with chocolate and comforting myself with chocolate, which is a theme for me. but, having our desires where they should be.
100%. So that saying, is one. Actually, I'm looking at it right across from this room. We have another background that says an idol called food, and it's interesting because I either get a lot of love for that or I get a lot of pushback. And when I get pushback, it's people like, wait, JT, it's just food. Like, we need food to survive, right? We need food for nourishment. And the answer is yes. And what I hear you saying is the truth, right? So the enemy has taken things that were meant to be good and he's perverted them, right? Such as things like intimacy in the covenant of marriage, such as, enjoyment within the right parameters, food within the right amounts, right? And, when people sometimes hear me talk about this, they're like, well, you're doctrinizing food. And it's like, no, what I'm doing is I'm putting food back in its place. God says that everything he's made is good, including food, right? That he's given us all the plants and seeds to consume. But, like the book of Ecclesiastes says, there's a time and a place for everything. There's a season for everything. There's a season to reap. There's a season to sow and reap and so on and so forth. And so we go through these seasons, right? And so for us, inside of the plan, it's like phase 1, 2, and 3 are those seasons, where we take certain things out for, a period of time, and then we progressively bring those things back in because we don't demonize any specific food group. And then ultimately the idea is to come to freedom around food, that 80-20 freedom, right? But it sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, like you actually practice a 20-80. Is that about right? Like towards the beginning when you're like, oh, I'm good. I don't have this challenge anymore.
Yeah, I got comfortable and I was like, okay. And that was part of the danger of looking at the scale, though, I think, is because it hadn't caught up yet with the lack of self control that was starting to happen. And by looking at the scale, I was getting away with some things from, working out a little bit more and, just it kind of wasn't moving. And so I thought I was fine. And really, I was sort of building up to a situation that was not. And so that's another reason why, the scale is not the answer to where, you should be looking. It's the habits, it's your prayer life, it's your, what are you actually doing and not what is the scale doing? Because it can be slow I got away with it for a little while before it did anything. But to anyone who says that you're over spiritualizing food, which I feel like that's something that you could sort of come up with. But if you think about, the Lord's prayers about our daily bread, I mean, God uses food in a spiritual sense to speak to us. And you think about God taught Israel to depend on him by giving them manna every day, not 2 days, not 3 days, not, you can't take this for a week and don't talk to me later. It'll be rotten, right? I mean, the whole point of it daily was he was teaching them to come to him daily, because that's about how long we can go. Like we just are not meant to try to sustain ourselves for any period of time. And that's the point. And I think food is a way to illustrate that.
Manage portions, right? It's like eat it today because it'll go bad tomorrow, and don't hoard food, right? And so Yeah, there just way too many lessons. This is one of the things I say, two of the most common themes inside of all the 66 books of the Bible are money and food. It's all over the 66 books, and there's a reason for that, because I truly believe food is a spiritual thing. Hence the reason Christians pray before they eat. So it's just interesting. I think oftentimes when we don't want to submit to a narrative, right, we can find ways to sort of, apologetically get out and make excuses around it. And I see this often, for example, when, for phase one is very conservative. We'll have people reach out that are heavily, heavily dependent on sugar, AKA carbs. And they'll start sending me all these different things like, well, what about this protein bar? What about this bread that has 3 net carbs? And what I hear them saying is like, I'm not ready to give up that idol. I still want to sort of, play with the idol a little bit and see what I can get away with. And the answer there is always like, no, first 6 to 8 weeks, let's cut it out so that we can get that out of our system. And so coming back to this, if the goal is to take those 10 pounds off, and I'll coach you here in camera, the idea is to go back to a phase one, right? Maybe not a full 6 weeks, but maybe 4 weeks, right? And do a nice little reset of 4 weeks, and then slowly but surely transition into phase two, phase three. You obviously know that once you come through the program, you have the ability to reach out to me, ask me questions indefinitely. So, definitely want to remind you of that. And just proud of you because I think, you've made some distinctions here. I commend you for your convictions, for your faith, for being a strong woman of God, and to bringing this into this area that oftentimes is kind of neglected because it's not seen as something important for this side of eternity. But obviously through, I think before you came on the program, you knew that, but now those convictions are even stronger now that the Lord has allowed you to see those things. And so super, super powerful. Tia, what would you say to people on the other side that are watching this video and they're like, that sounds good, but I've done X, Y, Z and nothing has worked for me. I've always been a yo-yo dieter. I'm big boned, all the things that you hear out there. What would you say to that person?
Human strength is very limited. And um, especially if you've already proven that you can't do something on your own, you've been trying and it's not working. I would argue that it's because you're not meant to do it on your own. And that's one of the things that I had said to you in my voicemail is that I'm so grateful that God did not allow me to continue under the illusion of my own strength. I'm kind of glad it didn't work because it put me back to focusing on him and realizing, oh yeah, I can't really do anything apart from him. And so, if you're struggling against something, then, it might be, your creator telling you, let me do this. This is what you need. This is where you need to find it. There really isn't, I don't have another answer. Like there isn't another way to accomplish the things that we need in life. We're just not made to try to Lone Ranger our lives. It's just that's not what we're created to do.
Yeah, no. So yeah, what I hear you saying is the flesh can't outdo the flesh. We back in Paul's time, you had the Epicureans and you had the Stoics who were very much about self-control and discipline, but it was that kind of like that kind of white knuckle discipline, which is said, impose your personal will. And that only takes us so far. Right. But what you're saying is that leaning into that power, to that self-control that's given to you by God is way stronger and is always going to outdo the flesh, because the flesh can't outdo the flesh. So super powerful. Tia, thank you so much for being on this call. You just keep dropping wisdom bombs, and I want to keep going, but I want to be respectful of your time. And it's been great to reconnect. Thank you, because every time I listen to you, you excite me. It's cool to see how you're bringing these things together. And if you allow me to at another point, I'd love to have you on another one of our internal webinars so you can encourage people. And I think that would be great.
I would love that. And I do want to commend you for bringing someone on who probably on a different program under different circumstances, you'd like, we're going to ignore that this happened. And so, I hope that people who are a part of your program understand your heart behind it. And, the fact that you really are trying to help people find actual freedom and you're not afraid to show the ups and the downs of it, I think is hopefully super impactful, and people can realize that this is you're running a great program for good reasons. And so God bless you for that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your words. They mean a lot. And yeah, this is, the pretty, the ugly, and the middle of it. It's all part of the journey, and it's not meant to be a perfect journey. And so, I believe we learn more when we're down than when we're up. I think victory sometimes can be a little intoxicating, and it can blind us. But when we are in the trenches that we have the best view of what's actually happening. And so, no, it's awesome. I love. This is why when you said, you're like, I don't know if you want to have me, I'm like, absolutely, I want to have you. This is perfect, right? So very, very cool. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you got a lot out of that interview. And if you resonated with some of these things, if maybe you're struggling, maybe you've tried different diets, different things, and you've always wondered, like, why hasn't this worked for me? Like, I do things, I lose the weight, it comes back on. I think Tia really was able to hit it on the head, and she mentioned how, yes, mechanics can be useful, but ultimately what needs to happen is you need to bring God on board to the journey, and when you do so, you're always going to be successful. And so I hope you put these things to action. I hope this brought some conviction that will pull you in the right direction. And thank you so much for watching. This is the Empty Your Bucket Nutrition Plan. My name is JT Tapias, and we'll talk to you soon. Ciao, ciao.